What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Watching the Meta, the weekly series where we take a look at the people who are playing and watching the people who are playing, and the people who are watching the people that are playing the Modern and Pioneer and Standard challenges over the weekend for Magic Online. Some paper events when those are available to us, which there was a paper event this past weekend for Standard, and we'll get into that in a second. Before we continue, just wanted to say if my voice sounds a little weird today, that's because it is. I'm recovering from a pretty bad flu that I've had over the weekend. I've been mostly immobilized for the past couple of days, but starting to feel quite a bit better and hopefully good enough to be able to start streaming again. The last thing I want to mention before we continue is I know that I've been uploading a lot of Arena powered cube videos over the past week or so, and I've noticed the videos aren't doing as well, and I don't know if it's a combination of people just aren't as interested in Cube, or maybe it's the YouTube algorithm just not picking it up. But whatever the case, I know that there's a lot of people out there that watch this channel that are probably looking for some Standard content. Don't worry, the Standard content will resume once we get that ban list, which is going to be happening next Monday, right? November 10th. It's almost here. So we don't have to wait too much longer until we get that ban list, but just wanted to get that out of the way. Until then, there's going to be some more Cube content, so if you're interested in Cube, be sure to check some of that out, okay? And last but not least, before we get started, we can't forget the sponsor. A quick word from our sponsor, CoolStuffInc.com. This video is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com. Be sure to use promo code DOOM at checkout if you guys want to buy any singles, sealed sleeves, or deck boxes. Cool Stuff Inc. They got cool stuff, and they got it in stock. And with all of that out of the way, let us begin, as we always do, with the Modern format. Now, there were 7 challenges that are recorded over the past weekend here. 2 of them were won by Boros Energy, 2 of them by Domain Zoo, and then Affinity, Prowess, and Belcher. Business as usual. What's really funny to me is 2 challenges were won by Boros Energy, yet it was only 10, well, I mean, say only 10.7. Looking at this chart, it looks a little weird because comparatively last week, Boros Energy was the 8th most played deck, right? Now, the way that the chart works, and I know it's a little confusing sometimes, and I've seen some comments, but I kind of like doing it this way, where you put them in order on the chart, you put them in order of total metagame share last week. So Boros was 8th this week, but if we look at the numbers, it's actually 2nd, right? Right behind Jeskai Blink. What's also very, very alarming to me is Jeskai Blink has gone up in metagame share, which, if you recall last week, I thought that 21.4% was just kind of an anomaly because it did so well in Houston, and here we are another week later, and it's still 23.2%. Now, I don't know if that's just the combination of people copy-pasting deck lists, where there's a lot of people, a lot of grinders who play on Magic Online specifically will, once they're going into the tournament, they'll copy whatever the most recent winning deck list is and just kind of put that into the event. It could be a little bit of that. I mean, look, the deck is good. I'm not trying to sit here and say that Jeskai Blink is a bad deck. I just don't think it is a dominant 23.2% of the metagame kind of deck. Those numbers are reserved for broken combo decks like Amulet and Underworld Breach and Nadu and things like that. But yeah, I mean, we'll see how the metagame shifts and adapts over the next couple of weeks. I can't imagine anybody is assuming anything is going to get banned in Modern. I think Modern's in a really good spot right now. Just kind of a weird couple of weeks here for the Jeskai Blink deck. Is it Prowess, Domain Zoo, Affinity? Mostly about the same. Goryo's took a bit of a hit. We mentioned the resurgence in Boros, which is almost doubled last week. Amulet, Azorius, roughly about the same. So nothing else too crazy outside once you get past the top 10 decks or so. But yeah, Blink appears to be on the upswing, which is, I guess, compared to last week's numbers, I didn't think that was going to happen. But in any case, that is the metagame. Let's see if we can take a look through the top 32 and find some spicy deck lists for you. And the first deck that I want to mention here from Tempo Control in 25th place. Now, for people who have been following along in Modern over the past 6 or 7 months, you may have seen decks like this in the past, where they are trying to utilize Through the Breach and Emrakul to get a hasty Emrakul into play, attack your opponent for 15, make them lose 6 permanents, And this deck is very, very powerful because it has Ugin's Labyrinth for mana acceleration to power out Talisman. So you have a bunch of ways to cast Through the Breach faster. You have Eldrazi Temple and Kozilek's Command. Very, very powerful combination of cards to be able to... I mean, K-Command, like, what doesn't this card do? There is nothing that this card does not do. It kills creatures, it exiles graveyards, it draws cards, just legitimately does everything. The new addition here that I wanted to bring up was Dress Down, where if the most played or best deck in the format is Jeskai Blink with 4 main deck copies of Solitude, having access to Dress Down does make a lot of sense. Now, if you're going to ask me how Through the Breach Emrakul and Dress Down works, where you Through the Breach the Emrakul into play, they go to Solitude, then you Dress Down, what happens to your Emrakul? I don't actually know the answer to that question. So if anybody does in the comments section down below, for the people watching this, and for me, myself, let me know in the comments section if we get any judges out there. I'm pretty sure the Emrakul would not die on your turn, but then die on your opponent's end step. I think that's how that works, but I'm not 100% positive. But yeah, in any case, Through the Breach, Emrakul, that's kind of the main game plan. You still have some Eldrazi stuff with like Devour, Null Drifter, Sire. So you can kind of play a normal Eldrazi game in the games where you don't have Breach Emrakul, but it's sort of like Eldrazi combo in a way. There's the sideboard there for posterity's sake, so shout out to Tempo Control. Now, for anybody that has seen Scapeshift in a deck list over the past 6 months or so, you would automatically associate that with Amulet Titan. But what if I told you there's still some brave souls out there that are trying to cast Scapeshift for Valakut and Six Mountains? And GINP here in 20th place is one of those brave souls. There's a couple cool things about this deck list. So what I want to punch you towards is the 4 Coiling Oracle and 4 Icefang Coatl. These cards are normally associated with Birthing Ritual, where they are blue-green creatures that allow you to draw cards in the case of Icefang or replace themselves in the case of Oracle, give you a little bit of ramp as well. And then they can also be sacrificed to Birthing Ritual. Well, it turns out that when you have a combination of 8 blue and green creatures, right, 4 Oracle, 4 Icefang, you now can actually sort of enable 2 different flares, where you can have Flare of Denial as a way to protect you against your opponent's counter spells, or just counter one of their very, very good proactive cards. And you can also use Flare of Cultivation, which is, if you can sacrifice this for its alternate cost, you can get a little bit of ramp action. And I really think that's cool, where you have this, again, 8 package of creatures that turns on, you're playing 4 Flare of Denial, 4 Flare of Cultivation, so you have a little bit of ramp, a little bit of counter magic, you have some card selection with Stock Up and Consult the Star Charts, and then, yeah, the 4 Scapeshifts, and that is pretty much it. There's some interaction here, Fire Magic and Lightning Bolt, the main deck Fire Magics, very, very good against stuff like Boros, and then a couple of Tamios as well. Tameo, a sort of another alternate game plan here, where if you can't get the Scapeshift stuff going, you can use Tameo, draw a couple extra cards, flip Tameo ideally. But yeah, this is sort of like your classic take. There's a lot of bangers in the sideboard too. Ground Seal, Propaganda, sort of your classic take on Scapeshift. And again, I've seen a lot of Scapeshifts resolve over the past few months, and most of the time they're getting Lotus Fields. But in this case, this is good, clean, honest Scapeshift. Apparently the theme of today is just decks that haven't seen in Modern for quite some time. We're just dredging up old favorites. This is Infect. Sakavek in 16th place here. Now, this isn't necessarily the Infect deck that you're used to. If you've been playing Modern for quite some time and I ask you, what does an Infect deck look like? You're going to tell me Glistener Elf and Blighted Agent and a bunch of pump spells and Inkmoth Nexus. The Infect decks these days, they look a little bit different. So they're mainly centered around Venerated Rot Priest. This is actually, if you look at the deck list, the only card in the entire 75, we'll get to the sideboard in a second, that can actually give your opponent poison counters. So this one, it has Toxic 1, and it says whenever a creature you control becomes the target of a spell, target opponent gets a poison counter. So the idea is to get multiple Rot Priests into play, which you can do with stuff like Green Sun Zenith and March of Burgeoning Life. That's a weird one. So you have ways to get additional Rot Priests into play. You still have some ways to protect them with Tamiyo Safekeeping and Spellskite. Against red interaction, you're pretty good against because you have Mutagenic Growth and Gather Courage. And then what you want to do is you want to target your Rot Priest a bunch, because if you have 2 Rot Priests in play, every single time you cast a pump spell or even a gut shot targeting your own Rot Priest, that both of them will trigger. So every one of those represents 2 poison counters. And then at the very, very end, you can cast Ground Rift, which is a 1-mana storm card that says target creature without flying can't block this turn. Well, I don't see flying anywhere on this. So the idea is to storm up a bunch, Ground Rift, get 4 or 5 copies, all of those target your own Rot Priest, which will in turn give your opponent lots and lots of poison counters. Very, very cool deck list here. I've seen some people working on this in the past. I think Spike may have tried it at one point too. But yeah, I mean, this deck was really made possible with the unbanning of Zenith, because now you have Zenith, Summoner's Pact, and March alongside the Rot Priests, so you have a lot more redundancy than you did previously have. So shout out to Sakovic for the sweet little Infect deck. And last but not least, I just wanted to kind of highlight this Domain Zoo deck here from, so it's actually just Mudkips spelled backward. Very, very funny. In 5th place here in one of the challenges. The only reason I wanted to highlight this is because it's got Felia Riddler, and I didn't think that those cards were allowed to be played in Zoo. I thought those were only for generic Jeskai Blink decks. But it appears that the Riddler Felia phenomenon has made its way into Zoo decks as well. And this kind of makes me wonder, what other decks can we just slot Riddler Felia into? It's just such a good package of cards. Both cards are very individually powerful in their own right, and they just work so well together in a lot of tempo and control style shells. So it makes you kind of wonder, maybe there's some other room for exploration with Riddler Felia, but this is the new face of Zoo, maybe, question mark? In any case, that is going to be the last deck we take a look at here for Modern. Let us switch over to Pioneer. And Pioneer looks pretty good, honestly. This metagame is very, very healthy. It's almost as sort of, well, I was going to say almost as diverse as Modern, but Modern has the Jeskai Blink 23% kind of weird thing going on. But yeah, this metagame looks fantastic. Last week, Orzhov Monument was at a relatively high 17.5%, down this week to 9.4%. There's not a single deck over 13%, which I love. The challenge winners were 2 Monument, 1 5-color Legends, a Boros Convoke, an Izzet Phoenix, and a Mono Red Mice. And as far as percentages, I mean, everything looks pretty good. Mono Red Mice, about the same. Phoenix down a little bit. Azorius Control, the same. Demons up slightly, but nothing crazy. Grow Prowess, about the same. Scape Shift down a little bit. It just, every single thing. I'm trying to think of even something to talk about here. I mean, Izzet Prowess went up from 2.5 to 4.7. Celestia Company, I think that one is one where we didn't really see a lot of it over the past couple of months. And 4.2% from 0 is a relatively big increase. And the other one is that we're going to actually take a look at in a little bit is Rakdos Prowess, up to 3.6%, which is a reasonable metagame share in terms of like the second tier of decks, if you will. And the reason I wanted to highlight that is because we've seen a lot of mono red, and we haven't really seen the Rakdos Prowess. I'm trying to remember when that deck started picking up in popularity. It was, I think, a little bit before the last RC, which was in Washington, D.C., somewhere around that time. But I think that's when it was really like popularized, and a lot of people were playing it at that event specifically. But we hadn't really seen a lot of the Rakdos Prowess. So we'll get to that in a second. But as far as the metagame as a whole, looks great. I don't really have anything crazy to say here. All these numbers look good. Pioneer appears to be in a great spot. Why can't we have Pioneer events, Watsy? Anyways, so with all of that said, I do have some sweet deck lists for you, so let's go ahead and take a look at those. And the first one I have here from FGC in 19th place. This was actually in the Showcase, what are they called? I think they're called Showcase Challenges. Right, Showcase Challenges, and then the smaller events is the Showcase Qualifiers. But in any case, this is Jeskai Ascendancy. And what's interesting about this deck list, I feel like I've seen, not this exact deck list, but something very similar to this before. The concept is you pair Jeskai Ascendancy with Retraction Helix and a 0-mana artifact. So basically what that means is that Helix on a creature gives your creature the ability to tap, return a non-land permanent to its owner's hand, right? So you tap your creature, you pick up your 0. You replay your 0, which triggers Jeskai Ascendancy. Jeskai Ascendancy untaps the creature, you tap the creature, bounce the 0, play the 0, untap the creature. You get the idea. So it basically generates a way to mill your entire, or draw, discard your entire deck. But if you, in this case, the creatures here are only legendaries. If you have a Mox Amber and you're floating blue mana the entire time, you also make infinite blue mana. And what you can actually do is if you have a way to access red, just any one singular red source left over, you can eventually draw a Cutter, play and equip it, and the creature that you have been untapping is also getting +1/+1 every time. So now you have an infinitely large trample haste creature to attack your opponent with. You can also, if you have already a Cori-steel Cutter in play, then when you're going through the loop, you get the monk token, and then every single time you're going through that loop, the monk token is getting exponentially bigger. What's really cool too is there's also, you don't even necessarily need the Jeskai Ascendancy because Rona, Helix, Amber is enough by itself. So if you have Amber and Helix, right, you then Helix the Rona, Amber tap for blue mana, Rona bounce the Amber, cast the Amber, untap the Rona, Rona bounce the Amber, you make infinite blue mana, and then once you have infinite blue mana, well, I guess you can't infinitely loot, but you can draw discard with the Rona, and then you can find some stuff there. So a lot of ways that you can actually set up the combo. There's a Planisphere here, a whole bunch of cantrips like Sleight of Hand and Consider, and Treasure Cruise. I know everybody loves that card. So there's the Jeskai Ascendancy deck. Kind of interesting sideboard there, a lot of one-ofs, but really cool looking deck. And the one thing I want to shout out before we move on to the next deck is Restless Spire. So this card can actually kind of be a combo piece because it turns into a creature that taps for mana, right? But with Jeskai Ascendancy, that is kind of what you want. You want mana creatures in the Jeskai Ascendancy deck. So really cool addition here of the Restless Spire. So big shout out to FGC. Next up here from John Rapp in 29th place. This is a mono black mid-range deck. And the reason I wanted to highlight this is, well, there's some Through the Omen Path cards. Luis and Egrix show their faces here in this particular deck list. And I haven't seen a lot of mono black players experimenting with that kind of stuff. So other than that, this is just your sort of tried and true Demons deck. Unholy Annex, Mutavault, that kind of package makes a lot of sense. Fatal Push Thoughtseize, we've seen that before. Shieldred, Gifted Aetherborn is the 2-drop instead of the card that I can't remember the name of, the 2-mana 3/1 Menace Demon. I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments. But yeah, playing that instead of the other 2-drops, 4 Trespassers, couple Lilianas. But yeah, I mean, I like the addition of Luis and Egrix because it gives this deck a little bit more top end. But Luis specifically can also be an early game card. If you need something to fill the gap in the curve, Luis can do that for you, but it also has a very, very high upside of just being a fireball very, very late, of the late stages into the game. So I think that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, cool looking deck list here. There is the sideboard there. And again, shout out to John Rapp. We need to bring back the 80 cards, by the way, meme. Claudio here in 26th place. If you didn't already guess, this is the Orion deck because it's going off the page. And there's a lot going on here. So at its core, this is sort of like we've seen Omnath decks in Pioneer in the past, right? So that's kind of where you're starting off. You're starting off at a baseline of Omnath. And I guess Up the Beanstalk is maybe like the core fundamental pieces here. For Up the Beanstalk, you have Overlord of the Hotwoods, you have Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, but most importantly, you have Quantum Riddler. And I don't know if you know this, but if you have a Beanstalk in play and you have a Riddler in play, and you empty your hand, and the last card you cast happens to be a 5-mana spell, you draw 2 cards off the Beanstalk. And then if you empty your hand and cast your Yorion, you draw 2 cards off the Beanstalk. You see where I'm going with this, right? You have Traverse the Ulvenwald is kind of a sick card here too, because you have a bunch of different types. There's some sorceries, some instants, some enchantments that maybe go to the graveyard naturally anyways, some fetch lands to pair with the Omnaths, which make a lot of sense. So you get Delirium with some amount of regularity, and that can give you consistency on Riddler. And last but not least, what's also really, really sick about the Yorion in this deck is you can actually, so say you have an Omnath, right? And you have a Yorion in hand and you fetch, you have a fetch land with Omnath. You make some mana. You get basically you get the 7 mana. You can warp the Riddler, cast the Yorion, flicker the Riddler, and then it'll stay in play when it comes back at the end of turn. So just if you've ever wanted to draw a lot of cards, I can't really imagine a deck better at doing that than what you see in front of you. So it's an acquired taste, I'll say that. And as promised from earlier, here is the Rakdos Prowess deck list. That this is, I'm not going to say that every single deck list was the exact same, but this is within a couple of cards, basically what all the Rakdos Prowess players were playing. And again, new card alert, Firebrain Scheme. This one is a card that I had initially thought was going to make somewhat of a splash in these red decks in Pioneer that have Heartfire, Hero, and Challenger. They're a lot worse in Standard now that Hero is banned, but in a format where you can still play both of them, this card gives you the ability to keep churning with, you can exile 2, take whatever one is better at that moment, or you can use the second mode to give 2 things +1/+0 and First Strike, which will then in turn give you multiple Valiant triggers with Hero and Challenger. Then for people who haven't seen this deck before, it's, again, very similar to what Mono Red does, but the big difference here is Callous Sellsword, where you have a bunch of pump spells like Flowstone Infusion and Infuriate to pump up your creature +3, or in the case of Infusion +2. Monstrous Rage, again, just Standard All-Stars. Every card that gets banned in Standard just finds its way into Pioneer at some point. But yeah, pump up your creature, fling it, you get the idea with Hero, you know how that works. You still have a couple of Manifold Mice to be able to pump up your Challengers and Heroes. So, but yeah, just wanted to highlight that with 4 copies of Firebrain Scheme is what these decks are cooking with. Black also gives you some pretty good sideboard cards with Thoughtseize and Fatal Push for what it's worth. But yeah, that is going to do it for Pioneer. Last but certainly not least, let's talk about Standard. And here's Standard. Now, normally what we've been doing over the past couple of weeks is the meme of where I just say, here's Standard, let's move on. But, this week is the last week before November 10th will save us. So, 3 Cauldron, 1 Omniscience, 2 Sultai Self-Mode. Mono Red didn't even win a challenge this weekend. I don't know how that's possible. But yeah, for those of you who don't know, the standard ban list, it basically is the standard ban list. It's a full ban and restricted announcement, but we all know that Standard is going to be drastically affected by this. That's happening next Monday, November 10th. So I'm going to be doing a live ban list reaction. I'm going to record that for YouTube, and then as soon as that goes live, I'll go live on Twitch, play some new Standard, and I know a lot of people are excited for that, myself included. I've been not interested in Standard at all for the past month and a half, and rightfully so. The format is what it is, but thankfully we will get to say goodbye to this format. Now, before I let you go, if for some reason you are interested in playing Standard over the next week or so until we get the bans, or maybe even some decks that we can look at post bans, I got some deck lists for you. Let's look at those. All right, I got 3 that I want to take a look at here. The first one is from Milkshake, and this deck does bring the boys to the yard. So Golgari is the name of the game here, and what I wanted to highlight here is the inclusion of Demon Wall with Ouroboros. This is something when Edge of Eternities first came out and I saw Ouroboros, I thought of that as a relatively good interaction because Ouroboros triggers at beginning of combat, which means that it puts the counters before you declare attackers, and that way you can put the counter on the wall and then attack with it. But I hadn't really seen a lot of people playing, maximum Ouroboros and maximum Demon Walls. And paired with Annex, I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, I'm not necessarily certain that bad is the other 2-drop you want to play. Personally, I would maybe look towards something like a Mosswood Dread Knight over bad. But I do like the idea of Demon Wall and Ouroboros alongside removal spells, Shoot the Sheriff tactics, stab, couple of Preachers, Maelstrom Pulse, Betrayal. But yeah, I really, really like Ouroboros Demon Wall. Just wanted to highlight that as a very, very powerful interaction. And maybe after the bans, Golgari is playable again. Claudio's back, 30th place in one of the challenges here. Sultai Control. Not a lot of creatures, 4 Meringue and 1 Disruptive Stormbrood, but a lot of kill spells. Caustic Exhale, 3 steps, Bitter Triumph, Dispelling Exhale, Essence Scatter, Shoot the Sheriff. And the reason I wanted to show you guys this deck is I've seen some blue-black control decks, but I haven't really seen a lot of people splashing green for Bargain and Necropsy. And this is one of those cards that has a very, very high stock right now due to its ability to kill Agatha's Soul Cauldron and Prophetic Memory. It's possible that once we get the bans, depending on what happens, of course, this card might get a lot worse after some of those bans. So keep that in mind. I think this card has an extremely high stock right now and is one of the best cards against Cauldron. But if that deck gets taken down enough, maybe this card doesn't become quite as good. But yeah, I think the idea of just playing a bunch of kill spells with Meringues, 3 steps, Bitter Triumph, and a bunch of deadly cover-ups, I think that's a good strategy. But just, again, Bargain, also fantastic card. And the cool thing about Bargain is you don't even necessarily need green mana. You can pay blue, black, and 2, look at the top 4, but 2 of them, which is basically like you're casting a kicked consult on turn 4 anyways. So yeah, cool looking list. Green also gives you some good sideboard cards like Heritage Reclamation, Fangkeeper's Familiar is pretty sweet one. So shout out to Claudio for this lovely looking Sultai deck. And last but certainly not least, from Spock Vita Loca in 14th place, it's mono black, but with some different cards that maybe we don't usually see in mono black. So Cecil, Forsaken Miner, I've seen those before. We can move on. Iridescent Vinelasher is a powerful card, and I feel like people have, really only associated this card with either being put into a Crimes deck or being put into a Lizards deck. And you really only want this if you are synergizing with it in some way. But the reality of the fact is, it's 1 mana for a 1 power creature that effectively deals your opponent 2 a turn. If you get you get to attack with it and deal them 1 damage. And then once you get the 3 mana, right, you're paying 3 mana, you're getting 2 power on the battlefield, and then you're dealing an additional 2 damage per turn. So it's 3 mana and you get 4 damage per turn cycle out of it. So it is, even if you're just playing it at face value, it's still just a pretty good card. Maybe this deck could even play a couple Field of Ruins too, or I guess Demolition Field, to be able to help facilitate that. Gatekeeper of Malakir, a card that I'm going to be completely honest with you, before today's video, I kind of forgot was legal in Standard. Shout out to Foundations, by the way. And Gatekeeper is a cool one. It's a 3 mana 2/2 that edicts them. You can play it on turn 2 if you need to. Timeline Color, haven't seen this one a ton, but 2 mana 2/2 haste that lets you cast from your graveyard using its warp ability. And then going back to 4 Slasher, 4 Bloodletter. And what I really like about this is the combination of Gatekeeper with this stuff, where normally they leave back an extra blocker. Maybe the Gatekeeper can help alleviate that to remove the blocker, a bunch of kill spells, annexes, soulstones, etc., etc. So cool looking take on mono black. Not entirely sure if this is where you want to be post rotation again, or post rotation. I'm calling it a rotation. That's how important this band is. But in any case, cool looking deck list here from Spock. And that, my friends, is going to do it for another episode of Watching the Meta. Thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And again, next week, we'll be talking about a format that has bans, although the challenges may not have the bans. We'll figure that out. Anyways, I'll see you next week. Thank you all for tuning in. Adios.